When an empath absorbs the narcissist's darkness and survives, Michel Foucault would say they don't simply heal, they reconfigure how power works through them. The person who once took in every projection ceases to be a docile body. The soul that once carried everyone else's burdens stops being a surface for inscription and becomes resistant to manipulation by refusing the regimes of truth that used to govern them. And, most strikingly, their very presence begins to destabilize the discourses others rely on to keep their own darkness unexamined. Picture this moment. You have carried their rage, their shame, their emptiness, until you could barely recognize yourself. You've been the receptacle of unprocessed affects while they walked away normalized, leaving you to sort the debris of a power relation that made you responsible for their equilibrium. But something shifts, not with anger or spectacle, but with a quiet, terrifying lucidity. You stop explaining yourself to people whose only listening was a demand for confession. You stop absorbing emotions that were never yours, but were imposed through the gaze and its disciplinary effects. And most devastatingly of all, you become unavailable to their manufactured emergencies. Foucault would not call this individuation. He would call it a change in subjectivation, the birth of psychological sovereignty as a practice of freedom. What emerges from this turn is not the same person who entered the narcissist's web. It's a different form of subject, produced by new relations of power/knowledge that can reorganize every relationship around them. And here's what most people miss. This transformation doesn't happen through therapeutic scripts alone or through consuming self-help discourse. It happens through a descent Foucault would recognize as genealogical, a rigorous, often harrowing inquiry into the historical formation of your own obedience. A plunge into the microphysics of power that breaks you open until only the practices of the self you choose remain. The empath who survives becomes something Foucault analyzed but rarely personalized in public, a practitioner of counterconduct. Someone who has stared into the disciplinary abyss and returned with their light intact, but with their tactics, habits, and truth games fundamentally altered. Foucault wrote that where there is power, there is resistance. The empath-narcissist dynamic is that furnace. It is a crucible that either crushes you into docility or forces you to invent unprecedented practices of freedom. This isn't just recovery. It is a reconfiguration of power, the kind of shift Foucault saw as essential for how subjects emerge and change within regimes of truth. And the narcissist, in their hunger to capture your attention and extract confession, accidentally becomes the catalyst for your most radical transformation. They think they're consuming you. In fact, they're forging you into something ungovernable by their techniques. Foucault spent decades studying how subjects are produced by institutions, discourses, and gazes. He noticed something unsettling about highly sensitive people. They often become what we could call affect containers, silently enlisted by norms to absorb the psychological waste others refuse to face. It's not that healthy people don't torture. Rather, the normalized often displace unresolved conflicts through subtle disciplinary acts. Empaths represent a third figure, those who take in the torture without reproducing it, until they learn to withdraw from the apparatus that makes them available for it. This generates what Foucault might call a totalizing relation in which the empath cannot separate their own affects from the effects of power circulating through them. The narcissist exploits this vulnerability ruthlessly, mobilizing the gaze, surveillance, and forced confession to use empathic sensitivity as an emotional dump. But here is where Foucault's insight matters. This exploitation serves a historical function. It exposes how power produces subjects. The big problems aren't solved. They are outgrown by changing the truth games we accept. The empath-narcissist dynamic compels this outgrowing in the most brutal way possible. Consciousness reorganized by crisis. The narcissist embodies the denied norm, the part of the social that refuses accountability while enforcing it on others. The empath becomes the repository for this denial. But by carrying it, they begin to understand how normalization operates, and that knowledge alters their perception of reality. For Foucault, consciousness evolves through struggle inside power relations. The empath-narcissist pairing is a vicious accelerator of this struggle. The empath doesn't just witness disciplinary tactics. They shoulder them until they develop what we might call power literacy, the ability to read manipulation the way a native speaker hears grammar. If you've ever felt like you carried someone else's emotional baggage, say, "I was their container." Foucault described experiences akin to the dark night in terms of subjectivation. For empaths inside narcissistic relations, this becomes saturation in the other's regime of truth. You don't just observe darkness, you are made to inhabit it. The narcissist's projection doesn't merely hurt, it rewrites your internal script. Their shame becomes your self-doubt, their rage, your anxiety, their emptiness, your depression. You absorb their toxins until your identity dissolves into a record of the other's demands. This is not mystical poisoning. It is the soul becoming the prison of the body through internalized surveillance and judgment. And yet, the psyche has a kind of immune response. When foreign discourses are forced into your life, the authentic self begins to forge what we might call counter-norm antibodies, a cellular-level capacity to recognize manipulation and reject it. This is why the empath's transformation runs so deep. You don't merely learn about manipulation, your nervous system acquires a visceral refusal of toxic power. The empath who survives has brought more of the unconscious mechanics of domination to light than most people ever will. They become a kind of wounded healer, not by virtue of mystical suffering, but by translating pain into a new practice of truth. Foucault observed that after the most intense conflicts are overcome, a durable calm can arise, not transcendence, but competence in navigating power. He wrote about death, not of the ego, but of particular forms of subjectivity that no longer serve a life. For empaths who survive narcissistic abuse, this death is brutal because their entire identity was built around availability, explanation, and care. The breaking point is quiet and terrifying. One morning, you realize you don't recognize yourself. Your empathy feels numb, your hope contaminated, your trust shattered. Accepting oneself completely is terrifying, but for the empath at rock bottom, there seems to be no self left to accept, only a transcript of other people's needs. This is the dissolution necessary before new forms of life can emerge. We cannot change anything until we see how our complicity with normalization has functioned. Acceptance here is not capitulation. It is the precondition for rewriting the script. And here, Foucault's decisive insight lands. You are not what happened to you. You are what your practices make you. The old self must end so another relationship to power can begin. The narcissist, attacking your identity, accidentally dismantles the compliant persona built to avoid conflict. They become, unwittingly, the disassembler of your obedience. In that darkness, something ancient awakens. Not a metaphysical self, but a capacity for practices of freedom. You discover you are not your trauma, not the affects you absorbed, not your compulsion to give. You are the one who can choose different techniques of the self. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not by essence, but by exercise. The empath's path follows what Foucault called an askēsis, sustained exercises that form a freer subject. What emerges is not a hardened heart, but an integrated empath, sensitivity surrounded by non-negotiable boundaries. Foucault described the transcendent function in different terms, the creation of something new from the clash of forces. The survivor integrates tenderness with lucidity, care with limits, witness with refusal. The narcissist remains largely unconscious of the mechanics they wield, while the empath becomes hyper-conscious of them. This produces psychological sovereignty, what we might call shadow immunity, the ability to see projections before they land. It's night vision acquired by living in the dark. The old tactics now slide off like water on glass, not because you're hard, but because you're awake to how power tries to enlist you. Until we make the unconscious operations of power visible, they direct our lives and we call it fate. Once visible, they lose their hold. The integrated empath doesn't just resist manipulation, their presence disrupts it. Foucault framed this in another key. Changes in one node of a network alter the whole. The purpose of existence may be, as he suggested, to kindle lights within darkness, practices that expose how domination works. The transformed empath becomes that light, not naive radiance that gets consumed, but fierce clarity that makes projection unworkable. If you've reached the point where manipulation feels obvious and ineffective, say, "I see the machinery now." Foucault catalogued dispositifs, apparatuses, rather than archetypes, but there is a figure that emerges through extreme testing. What we might call the gaze breaker. One who has walked through disciplinary hell and returned with forbidden knowledge, how to move through darkness without being consumed. Your existence threatens unconscious contracts that keep groups stable in dysfunction. People will do almost anything to avoid facing themselves. That's why your transformation can be so disruptive. You no longer cooperate with the collective unconsciousness that sustains domination. You've stepped outside the matrix of projection. Highly individuated people, in Foucauldian terms, become mirrors of conduct. Your presence compels others to see themselves, often for the first time. Unlike the passive mirror you once were, you now reflect truth. Projections fail to stick. People are forced to confront what they used to offload. That discomfort explains the backlash. Some will call you cold, changed, or mad. Others will be drawn to your gravity, a numinous effect when a new form of life becomes visible. If people treat you differently after your shift, say, "My energy changed and everyone felt it," the deepest effect lands with other empaths still trapped in narcissistic arrangements. Your being becomes proof that escape is possible, that transformation is real, that psychological imprisonment is not inevitable. Foucault named a paradox. True power comes not from dominating others, but from governing oneself so thoroughly that others cannot govern you. The transformed empath embodies this. Boundaries become fact, not performance. You don't announce them, you live them. This creates a paradoxical magnetism. The less you need approval, the more others seek yours. The less you're available for dumping, the more your limits are respected. Where love reigns, there is no will to dominate, where domination reigns, love is absent. The survivor's self-regard isn't narcissism, it is appropriate esteem, the ground of any healthy relation. You can only give what you truly possess, and what you now possess is unshakable worth. Radical self-acceptance, forged in fire, yields a surprising openness. By refusing to be anyone's waste bin, you become available for genuine connection. You can hold space for another's darkness without absorbing it. You become a conscious container with clear edges, not an unconscious sponge. Some people are called, Foucault might say, to a guardian function, not by policing others, but by embodying limits that protect life. Your boundaries become an inquiry that forces others to examine their patterns. You're a boundary beacon, living evidence that sovereignty is achievable. This guardian work spreads by resonance. Your way of being raises the temperature of truth around you. Your reactions are now chosen rather than compelled. You select which chemical reactions to join based on what serves your highest good, not on what others demand. This is not cruelty, it is consciousness. Indiscriminate giving is often an addiction to being needed. The transformation marks graduation from research into living, from trials of absorption to an ethic of care with discernment. Beware the integration trap, identifying so completely with your new hardness that you become rigid in the opposite direction. Some survivors swing from total porosity to total closure, mistaking isolation for safety. True integration means keeping empathy and boundaries, openness and discernment, compassion and standards. The goal isn't to stop feeling, it's to feel with awareness. Emotion, once made intelligible, ceases to rule you. The integrated empath feels everything and is consumed by nothing, able to witness pain without swallowing it, to support without self-erasure, to love deeply without disappearing. Old patterns will try to return, especially under stress. But once you've tasted freedom, you can't go back to unconscious servitude. Your circuitry has changed. Foucault believed individual transformations ripple outward. The transformed empath generates waves of consciousness. Without preaching, your presence licenses others to question their own obedience. You become living proof that emotional abuse need not be destiny, that empathy doesn't require self-sacrifice, that sensitivity can coexist with strength. People will try to pull you back with guilt, manipulation, or emergencies, a crab bucket effect. But you now recognize these as projections of trapped energy rather than genuine calls for help. If this journey resonates, say, "My healing became my superpower." The empath who absorbs the narcissist's darkness and survives doesn't just heal, they evolve into a form of subjectivity Foucault could only gesture toward. A self-governing life that resists capture. You become proof that the psyche is more resilient than we imagined, that freedom can emerge from the darkest conditions. That authentic power comes not from control over others, but from mastery of your own conduct. The narcissist thought they were consuming your light. Instead, they refined it into something unbreakable. They thought they were destroying your empathy. Instead, they clarified it into compassion that cannot be exploited. Your transformation becomes a beacon to other empaths still trapped, showing that freedom is not only possible, it becomes likely once you grasp how power tries to operate in you. If you want to explore whether you're acting from your authentic practices or from absorbed projections, turn to the arts of the self, reflection, refusal, and fearless speech. Your sensitivity was never a flaw. It was a capacity waiting to be activated by conscious practice. Thank you for walking this path of transformation. See you at the next level of freedom. Ready to break the script and rewrite your power? If this message resonated, subscribe to Projected Minds, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's amplify conscious practice together.